Thanks.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you, David. Thank you, Lenny. It's a pleasure to come and speak at ODI. And I'm so sorry Anu couldn't be here. I was looking forward to hearing her comments as well. And thanks to all of you for coming. It's nice to see so many young people in the audience. It's always a pleasure. So let me just plunge into this once you've admired the nice cover. This is a big deal, this participatory development stuff. $85 billion in lending over a 10-year period from 1999 to 2009, 2010 really, at the World Bank, 2012. It's one of the major modalities of development lending. And that's just from the World Bank. You combine that with DFID, with the Norwegians, the Swedes, and everybody else. You're looking at hundreds of billions of dollars in loans, grants, lending to this modality of development. And generally speaking, if you read the literature on this stuff, not the academic literature, but the justifications for this kind of lending, it's all very happy stuff. It says it improves accountability in the use of public funds. It improves service delivery, local access to local public goods, enhances livelihoods, empowers the poor, rebuilds the economy. I mean, it's basically, it's going to cure all the problems of development, right? So everybody's very happy that they're lending money to this kind of thing. Yeah. Now, the point we make in the book is that there's a big difference between what we call organic participation and induced participation. What is organic participation? Organic participation is the anti-apartheid movement. It's the Arab Spring. It's the Indian independence movement. It is, all the wonderful work done by small NGOs all over the world, Seva in India, the Orangi project in Pakistan. I mean, I'm sure all of you are aware and familiar with so many efforts by highly motivated, intrinsically motivated people around the world who are doing extraordinary work in their own space to make the world a better place. That's organic participation, when you involve people in those efforts. Organic participation is also when governments choose, through a political process, to bring participation into how decisions are made. So for instance, you can see that, say one could make the case that the participatory budgeting in Porto Alegre was a form of organic participation because it came about organically, not because the World Bank told them to do it. But that's not where the lending is going. Lending doesn't go to organic civil society actors. Lending goes to large governments, large bureaucracies that try to bring these ideas and try to induce them via large bureaucratically run projects. Yeah? There's a big difference there. And what are the differences? Think of the differences. You don't have intrinsically motivated actors anymore. You have people who are doing their jobs. That's fine, we all have jobs, it's a good thing to have. But you're not doing it regardless of, I'm committed to this. If I made no money, I would still do this. No. You're doing it because you have a job, you want to be promoted, you want to suck up to your boss, you want to make sure that things are going well for you. And you're working within a bureaucratic structure with all the limitations of bureaucratic structures. Bureaucracies tend to think they like to think in boxes. They are of course very confused, but they like to think in boxes. Everything should be neatly packaged and done in this nice way. And there's a lovely book called Seeing Like a State by Jim Scott that I'm sure many of you have read that shows how all that works. Bureaucracies cannot do organic participation. If they can, I should take that back since this is going to be public recorded. I shouldn't say that. I should say that bureaucracies have a hard time doing organic participation. Bureaucracies do induced participation. Okay. Now, our report is about induced participation. We don't have anything to say on organic participation. We, of course, it's not that we don't have anything to say, a few things to say, but really the book is focusing on induced participation, on that hundreds of billions of dollars in aid that goes into induced participation around the world. Now, let's start with this. We call it a framework, but it's really something quite simple. What is development? Okay. Now, if you think of it from an economist perspective, and I like that because it's sort of clean and neat. It makes the question simple. You could put it in a different language, but it's why do we do development? Why do governments even do anything? What are we trying to solve? We're trying to solve a problem of ultimately a market failure. Okay? If markets work for everybody and work beautifully, nobody would have to do anything. We just let laissez-faire happen, keep our hands out of the game, and beautiful things would happen. There'd be no poverty, everybody would have beautiful public goods, we'd all be happy citizens and smiling all the time. Yeah? But the problem is, of course, that's not the way markets work. Markets are affected by what are known as information asymmetries, coordination problems, inequities, that is inequality around the world, tend to exacerbate problems of coordination problems and information asymmetries, which means that markets function very imperfectly and function imperfectly in a way that screws the poor more than the rich. Yeah, putting that in very simple language. That's kind of well established. We all know that. Which is why the state has to step in to solve those problems. Poor don't get access to schools, poor don't get access to health. There are remote areas around the world that don't have access to anything. Development is about trying to fix those problems via the state. Yeah? And of course, what we found about 20 years ago, something that people had found a lot longer if they were actually working in these areas, but non-economists, was that the state also suffers from imperfections. Right? The state also has coordination problems. What is the coordination problems? When two folks cannot make a contract, cannot make an agreement because there's nobody there to enforce that agreement. That's a coordination problem. Or a coordination problem is where there's such differences in the kind of information that people have that some people have access to a lot of information, do very well. Some people don't have access to information, do very badly, which results in all kinds of things like corruption and so on and so forth that governments are beset by around the developing world and many other parts of the world, right? So the state also suffers from imperfection. So the state is screwed up and the market is screwed up, but the logic of participatory development is let's give the power to citizens. You read the 2004 World Development Report on service delivery, it exemplifies that. It sort of says, to improve public service delivery, let's go to citizens. That's the last step. We haven't done, let's push that. Now, what we point out in the book is the obvious fact that has been known ever since, at least since Mansell Olson in the 1960s, that collective action is a tremendously hard thing to do. If you belong to any collective, an apartment, in my apartment building, I don't belong to the committee, but I'm a member of my apartment building. We make decisions. We rarely make decisions effectively because all of us are disagreeing on everything all the time, and somebody has to come and ultimately force the issue. Yeah? This collective group here, I'm sure if you were to give me your views on Cameron, there'd be a diversity of views. Probably not. I don't know. So what I'm trying to say is that collective action is a hard thing to get. Also because collectives, if you wish to call it civil society as we do, you can do that, also suffer from problems of information asymmetries, coordination problems. Coming to a common decision is an incredibly hard thing to do. Civil society, however you might call it, is not one sort of homogeneous block of people. It's all kinds of people who disagree and have to be brought together in some way to think differently. And we go through a lot in the book is about asking what that means. Yeah. So if you go to any part of the world, these coordination problems affect civil society as much as they affect markets in the state. So development is a highly screwy space where everything is screwed up. Markets are screwed up, the state is screwed up, and civil society is screwed up, right? So what do you do? Where do you intervene? How do you fix things? And that's the real problem. If you go back, as I said earlier, to the logic here, markets are screwed up, states are screwed up, civil society will fix everything. No, sorry, everything is screwed up. That's the real world we work in. Where do we intervene? Okay? Now, keeping that perspective in mind, we come and take a look at the evidence. Things are screwed up, and in the screwed up world, you think you have the answers. This is what happens. What is civil society failure? I mean, let's come back to this in a second. I can skip this part. Now, one of the so firstly, there is something that we call civil society failure that has to be taken very seriously. That's a very important part of the book. That in fact, inducing participatory development should be, but isn't often in rhetoric, an act of building civic society. How do you build that? How do you build that strength? How do you build that capacity? That should be a big part of what you're trying to do, not assuming that it exists. Very different thing. Okay? That's one problem. Second problem is this issue of trajectories. Now, what do I mean by that? When you're building a bridge, what is development about generally? I mean, development used to be about building bridges, building dams, building schools, building things. A lot of construction, a lot of roads. When you're building a road, okay, in a good world, you can call an engineer. Engineer tells you you're going to have so many layers of this and rubber and tar and whatever else and stones, and you're going to have these two little gutters on the side so that water will drain out, and this is what it's going to cost. You do it. And you pretty much know that once you build the road, good things are going to happen. Build a bridge, when they built the Waterloo Bridge, good things started happening. People started going across the Thames quite happily, yeah? The London Bridge. These are predictable things to do in development. You build it, good things will happen, right? The challenge, of course, building it well and so on, but let's keep that aside. That's the way development likes to think. Development projects generally function with 3 to 5 year horizons. They have this idea that, in 3 to 5 years, if it's about building this hard stuff, once you do it, you can figure out what those outcomes are going to be. It's a very predictable game. So you bring that thinking of prediction, right? Because these things are predictable things to you. Remember what I'm saying. Development is used to building things. That's what development has been about. You're trying to apply that same logic to building states, to building societies. You can't play the same game. You cannot. Because think of any organic civic movement that you know, anything else. I mean, let's say, the anti-apartheid movement. How long did these poor folks struggle before they saw a result? How long were they thrown in jail? So many ups and downs. You talk to anybody involved in that struggle. You know, they with ups and downs, constantly figuring out strategies, fixing things, fixing that. We can't do this. We have to reject that strategy. Let's go in this way. You're constantly updating small gains, small successes. You're looking for what are called political opportunities to make a difference happen. Think of the Indian independence movement. Same thing. Us fighting you guys. You know, it was a hard struggle. Took about 100 years to happen. Yeah. So building civil society is a very, very difficult game. Now, that's not the way the project documents spell out that game. They have to do this within 3 to 5 years. They'll tell you, we can invest in social capital, and within 3 to 5 years, we will see poverty reduced by 20%. There's actually a World Bank design document that says that the 20% reduction in poverty over 5 years would be the largest poverty reduction ever seen in human history. Okay, and I can't tell you how many World Bank documents that I have seen personally state that they will do this. And nobody checks them. Do you realize you're calling for the largest poverty reduction in human history because of this little project you're doing? Is there a problem there? You don't see that. So if you look at that graph, the logic of these projects proceeds along the dotted line. You build civil society, that's a red dotted line, and good things that happen in a straight trajectory. And the blue line will then have all sorts of wonderful outcomes: reduction in poverty, improvements in household welfare, improvements in public goods. That's a projected path. The actual world is one in which is the solid line. That for a long time, nothing happens when you start doing these kinds of projects. Then maybe some things start happening. Maybe, right? But after some things start happening in terms of building civic capacity, it takes a while for that to show up in outcomes, right? That's the real world. That real logic is not what you see in the theory of change that these projects espouse. Okay? Now, from those two, the civil society failure, this idea of these trajectories, we can now start examining the data and ask, what do the data really tell us? And we sort of looked at, I should say, something like over 5 or 6, I mean, actually, 500 is what we cite, but we looked at about 600 things that people had written about participatory development, induced participatory development, a lot of impact evaluations, some anthropological work, some political work from political science across disciplines. And we wanted to ask the following question: does participation benefit poor people? I'm just going to read the big, bold headlines here because I don't have much time. Does participation improve accountability? And does participation increase civic capacity? And I'm going to examine the evidence on each of these things one by one. These are all the claims of participatory development that you see in these projects. How much and how well do they do these things? Okay. So does participation benefit the poor? First question, are resources better targeted? You know, the whole claim of participatory development is when you bring people into the decision-making process via these projects, the poor are going to benefit more because they're empowered. And the answer is actually just mildly better overall, but for things like health and schooling. But overall, you see a lot of elite capture. You see a lot of rich people stealing money. Okay? And particularly in those villages, those municipalities that are unequal, high levels of inequality, that are hierarchical, that are remote, that are poor and less literate, which is pretty much most of the developing world. Okay? You see these things have a problem. Poverty and livelihoods is a mixed impact. You don't see much public service. Do they improve public services? Here we find that community participation alone doesn't work. It's beneficial when you can build a school, but the government still has to provide teachers and notebooks and things of this kind. Sometimes they don't. There are larger gains under democratic decentralization. That's one of the interesting things about this. When you have democratic decentralization, then you have induced participation. That intersection, that combination works pretty well. So the evidence is little worse than mixed. Okay. Accountability and civic capacity. Sorry, I have to rush a bit because I just have half an hour and there's a lot to say. So I'm gonna just ask you to. The book is a free download on the internet. econ.worldbank.org/localizing development. It's all free. It's also on Google Books. It's also on Kindle. Any form you want to read it, it's all free. So, does it improve accountability, social accountability? And it's not clear that moving resources to the local level in an induced participatory way reduces capture or corruption. Okay. Why? Because the community's capacity to monitor these things is quite limited. And of course, capture is more likely in communities that are remote, poor, unequal, less literate. Again, you get these results, okay? But, what's interesting? People seem to value participation for its own sake. When you look at projects that really saw no difference, but you ask people to participate in the decision-making process, they tend to value that. That seems to have some intrinsic value. That's sort of an interesting result. And generally, the other thing you see, and this will be a theme that I come back to again and again, that bottom-up process of building community capacity, of getting communities involved, when it is supplemented by top-down efforts, okay, social audits, providing information, protecting the local communities and doing their work, that sandwich seems to make a big difference. And that'll be the big theme that I come to the end, the idea of the sandwich. Yeah. Civic capacity, does it improve civic capacity? There's less positive evidence. In fact, there's almost no evidence that these projects build social capital, quote unquote, or civic capacity, whatever social capital is. It doesn't seem to build it. Okay, firstly, I don't know if we know what it is, but if we knew what it is, it doesn't build it. No attempt to measure it has seen much results. Yeah? Why? Because participants in these programs are usually wealthier, more educated, of higher social status, male, politically connected. Okay, it seems to select that kind of person. There is some encouraging evidence, actually, a lot of it under democratic decentralization again and again. There's some good evidence that when you reserve seats in these management committees, community management committees for women, many countries are doing that, including India, that seems to send the benefits more towards women. So that seems to have a bit of an impact. Yeah. There's some debate on that. I'm happy to go through that. I've been on the other side of the debate, actually, but overall, that's my assessment. So what's the summary of the evidence? Outcomes are better when there is a supportive state structure and well-capacitated implementing agencies. Outcomes are better when you have elected local governments, democratic decentralization. Outcomes are better when participatory committees have teeth. They're empowered to make decisions. When there are mandates for inclusion, and when communities have better access to information on providers' budgets, etc. Outcomes tend to be worse when communities are poorer, more remote, more unequal, less literate, when there is less local management capacity. And this is a strange thing. I should just mention this. I'll come back to it if you're interested. A lot of these projects sort of say that for ownership, and that's the word they use, yeah, that's why I'm putting it in this quotes thing, we have to have communities make a financial or labor contribution. So you're building a school in a village, community should contribute 20% of that money. You're talking about, it ends up being a form of regressive taxation, okay, at the end. And we find that what it does, it worsens outcomes. Right? It's really, the evidence is very clear on that. This is not something you should be doing because you're screwing the poor on the backs of the rich, which is not something development projects should be doing, but somehow that logic seems to not apply to these projects. Okay, so what are the lessons for donors? And let me sort of, firstly, before I go there, sort of think about, what we can learn from these lessons, from this evidence. The first thing is, I mean, for instance, I mean, the book is a 350-page book. I've run through the evidence. There's 200 boring pages of evidence in 2 minutes. So, you know, please read it. And you should if you're students. You've got to read boring stuff. It's not that boring. No, I shouldn't say that.
No.
No, it's not that boring. It's technical stuff. So here's the thing. Let me put it in terms of a story. You know, I was trying to work on a community, building community capacity for citizen participation in India. A project for 5 years I worked on this. And we did a lot of good, solid ethnographic work on this. And here's what we found, that you had these village activists come up, and, you know, usually some guy who had a 10th grade education or some old man who was a retired government official would come back to his village, and they got activated, said, I'm going to fight the guys, fight these corrupt guys. You know, really heard all our messages and everything. And they went and started doing it, and one poor old man was kicked out of his house by his family. We can't deal with you, man. You're causing too much trouble for us. So his wife and his son kicked him out of his house. They made him live outside in their you know, the courtyard. Not the courtyard is too fancy a word for just some open space outside the house. So he was basically, he put up a tent and he was sleeping there. Because they wanted to send a signal to the village that this guy doesn't belong to us. We don't like what he's doing. What happens is that you're expecting folks who are the least empowered to fight the most empowered people in the village on their own. Nobody has their back. That is crazy. Okay? It works when the state, which has the guns, which has the police, which has the power, backs the poorest folks and gives them that political and sometimes security backing in order to fight local elites. That's how you start getting social accountability to start affecting corruption, particularly in the absence of democracy, right? Mm-hmm. And they don't see that happening a lot. You don't see that happening a lot. Right? That's point one. and it's shown up in the evidence. I mean, you find that participation works best in health and education. Health and education projects, almost unambiguously, you find participation makes people better off. Why? Because let's say a health ministry has said we want community managed clinics in villages. What it is also saying is that we, the central state, have committed to the idea of local participation that we will support in order to make community clinics more effective. So that sandwich has worked. Similarly in education, when you say you want to participate in education, say parent-teacher association will control the school budget, you committed to that enterprise, right? You sort of have a community-managed project, throwing money into the community, saying if you're going to find these village management communities to manage this money, what's going to happen? It's the worst elements, the most powerful elements going to come out of the woodwork to try to steal the money and put it in their pockets, which is what you see. So that's what's explaining the evidence, right? That's the real world. So repairing civil society, and the second point, so that's one thing, the sandwich matters, the sandwich, right? That sandwich matters, point one. Some people like to think of it as scissors, sandwich, whatever. So the second thing is that repairing civil society and political failures is a much harder task that needs a fundamentally different approach to development. You can't have these 3 to 5 year project horizons and expect magic to happen in that time with these projects. They need a much longer horizon. I would say the following: less talk, less money, more time. Okay, I really don't want any more lectures on participation, right? I really don't want to be told that's going to be finished in 3 to 5 years. We all know participation is a good thing. There's no debate on that. We all have a fundamental interest in a more participatory society. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. I'm certainly no centralist. But for God's sakes, if we're going to do this in the developing context, give it time. Give it the time to happen. Thirdly, the variability of local context. Remember, when you induce participatory development, each village is different. Change trajectories in each village. So that change trajectory I showed you is different for every village. And sometimes I'm working on projects that have tried to affect 25 million women. I mean, imagine the huge amount of variation you're dealing with, a huge amount of contextual variation. How do you deal with that? In order to do that well, you have to have extremely good monitoring systems. You've got to track everything if you want to understand what's happening in every village. Why? Because each village is going to require a different strategy. That village, like we can push ahead, this village is going to pull back a bit, let's see how things happen, then we can move forward there. How do you make those decisions? Without good data, good process monitoring, good decision support systems, which I'm happy to talk about what I'm trying to do in India. I'm happy to talk about how we're trying to fix those problems. But do World Bank projects do good monitoring? Let's see that next. What is monitoring in the World Bank? So, firstly, you got to pay attention to context, right? Each village is different. Here's the World Bank. And I'm saying this is in the book, guys. I mean, I'm just the messenger. I know this is public. We looked at the design documents of participatory projects over a 10-year period at the World Bank. I had a poor research assistant reading boring document after boring document for a 2-year period. Okay, we did textual analysis on these things. Guess what? A lot of them were cut and pasted. That was the project written for Indonesia. Let's take that paragraph, change the country from Indonesia to some country X. That's the new country X's new design document. The words are the same. How on earth does that reflect some sort of contextual understanding? Secondly, only 40% of these designs, I mean, these are designed, these are called the pads, nothing's happened here except the design. So in the design phase at least, you'd expect some thought to go into these things. You can claim anything in design, right? Nothing's happened yet. You can say, this is the best thing that I want. It's not implementation. In that design document, only 40% of these design documents said that monitoring is an essential part of project design. Only 40%. 60% did not. I know I'm stating the obvious, but that maybe sounds worse. They didn't even think that you need to track anything. Okay? So, what did we do? We went to we got a lot of pushback saying, we say that in the design documents, we actually do a lot of stuff on the ground. You should talk to our project managers and see what they say. We surveyed these project managers. And they basically said that the World Bank's, and by the way, I'm talking about the World Bank because I belong to the World Bank. It's easier to criticize one's own. I can assure you the same story is true of every donor in the world, right? The bank's operation policies do not provide adequate incentives for monitoring and evaluation and have very inadequate supervision budgets. It is not perceived to be priority for the bank's senior management. That's slightly changing. And monitoring and evaluation is treated as a box. They just kind of say, let's check the box and put it down. The standard duration of projects, which is an average of 5.5 years. Why? Because projects sometimes get renewed. Do not allow enough time to realize participatory objectives. So the bank is not prioritizing this stuff. So bottom line, patience is a virtue. Okay? Please be patient. The world doesn't change very quickly. Project designs and evaluations need to be informed by social and political analysis. The absence of that, I mean, you see a lot of absence of even thought given, except in few notable exceptions, as to what is the social and political system you're dealing with in order to bring about social change. You're doing a social or political project and think of it entirely in economic terms. That's a little strange. How do you understand political social dynamics without doing that kind of stuff? Monitoring systems need to be taken far more seriously. There's a sandwich that's involved. Impact evaluations and learning from it are essential. You need the system of feedback where what you see in the monitoring system is fed back and you learn from it and you fix things and you change incrementally. That sort of process is required. But perhaps the most important thing is an openness to learn from failure. Now, everybody talks about this now. Nobody talked about it when we wrote this stuff. And even though everybody talks about it, nobody does it, right? How do you learn from failure? How do you learn from success? Is an issue that I think still requires a lot of thought, right? But we certainly find that from the data. So the PowerPoint is done there. What I want to point out, I mean, if there's a bottom line of the bottom line, participation can be a great thing. Participation can be a tremendously empowering thing, can be, particularly when done by people acting out of intrinsic motivation, dreaming of a world that they want differently than what they see. They see a world out there, they hate it, they want to change it. All you young people going out there and fixing things, wonderful stuff, right? How do we bring that spirit? And there are people like this all over the world now. I mean, because particularly because of social media, it's a big deal. How do you bring that spirit into and channel it into better development? That's sort of the challenge. Yeah? The two things you need to do. Firstly, think about how organic stuff can be translated, can be scaled up via development agencies, and that's a challenge. A lot of people have different ideas. David and I were just talking about one earlier. That's something to think about. The second thing, if you're going to do it via big development projects, which basically seems to be the only way we do development, let's think about doing those development projects differently, not the way we've been doing them right now, because all we're doing is throwing money away so that rich people in the village can steal it, right? That needs to change. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. A passionate and engaging description on something where I think deserves this level of scrutiny to open a more sort of evidence-based and an honest debate about participation in the way it works in practice.